Well, I love the expression. I read somewhere recently that we don't get real until our hair is mostly loved off and our eyes are sinking into our head. We don't get real, but every opportunity you have, just celebrate just exactly who you are because that's exactly why you were born, and then more will be revealed. So, more along this line of being true to your heart, but it's just so powerful. And then all kinds of information will come to you if you're not pretending you're somebody else.
It's time for the Share Recovery Podcast, where we bring you amazing life-changing success stories from addicts and alcoholics all over the world who share their inspiring journey in recovery. And now, here's your host, O.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of TSP, the Share Podcast. And today we have Herby Bell joining us on the show. Herby is a recovery and wellness coach, as well as has his own podcast called Sober Conversations. Herby recently celebrated 22 years of sobriety, and he attributes those 22 years to his lifestyle choices: eating well, moving well, getting exercise, cognitive and psychological process of thinking well, emotional intelligence, and sleeping well. He calls those the high 5 essential nutrients for mind, body, spirit. All of those things get wrapped into his day on a daily basis. So join us now as Herby takes us through his battle with drugs and alcohol, his journey into recovery, and a deeper dive into wellness and how you too can thrive in recovery. But first, if you would like to know the best way to show your support for the Share Podcast, here are a few ways you can help. First, go to www.thesharepodcast.com, and there you can sign up for our free newsletter, which will let you know every time a new episode of the Share Podcast comes out. You can leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio. If you would like to know other places that you can listen to the Share Podcast, you can listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher Radio, iHeartRadio, and YouTube. If you would like to donate to the Share Podcast, you can do so via PayPal, or you can support us on Patreon. We have a thriving Facebook group that grows daily and has massive participation. Again, it's a private group, so if you would like to discuss recovery, share your experience, strength, and hope, help others, or lean on others for support, be sure to join the Facebook private group. And all of this information can be found on the website. So go to the website, and there you will find all the information that you need to help support the show. So now a quick message from our sponsors, and on to the show. Sober Nation is the largest online recovery community and treatment resource center. They provide treatment resources to those struggling with addiction, as well as to the family members who are caught in the crossfire. On top of that, Sober Nation is a huge community of good people who share their experience with each other. They have informative content, recovery and addiction news, as well as an entire clothing line which helps expand the culture of recovery. They can easily be found at www.sobernation.com. Sober Nation is putting recovery on the map. And finally, would you like to receive the most popular AA daily devotions free in one distribution? Transitions Daily delivers daily devotions from the 24 hours a day, AA Thought for the Day, Daily Reflections, Big Book Quote, Just for Today, As Bill Sees It, plus more. You can get our distribution daily via email, private Facebook group, or Twitter. Go to dailyaaemails.com for more information. And don't forget to share dailyaaemails.com with friends in meetings and with sponsees in recovery. Now back to the show. Hey, Herby, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Omar, it's great to hear your voice. Wow. I am 2 yards from San Jose, California, and you are in San Jose, Costa Rica.
Amazing how that works out, huh?
Sister cities.
All right, let's do this. Folks, today we have Herby Bell joining us on the Share Podcast. Herby is a recovery and wellness coach, and you can find Herby at his website, recoveryhealthcare.me, and he also has a podcast called Sober Conversations. So Herby, let's dive right in. There's a lot we have to cover here. So first, tell us a little bit about what your daily routine is like and how you incorporate recovery in the mix.
Well, it's my experience. I love to talk about the experiment of one. The scientific term is N equals 1, and the test is me. And so my experiment of one taught me in recovery that I need to be eating well, I need to be moving well, I need to get exercise, I need to be thinking well, some kind of cognitive or psychological process. I need to work on my emotional intelligence, and I need to be sleeping well. And I like to call those the high five essential nutrients for my mind, body, spirit. So those things get wrapped into my day on a daily basis. Otherwise, I do get hungry, angry, lonely, and tired, right?
Right.
So I think it's different for everybody that way, but those are kind of the basics that generate the good brain chemicals that we need as recovering people to be stoked. And that's what we want.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. What about meetings? Do you participate in any sort of 12-step fellowship?
I go to 12-step meetings periodically. I've got my favorites, but I don't attend regularly anymore. The canter and the platitudes that go on at AA meetings don't speak to me like they used to, although I think it's a fantastic process. It was part and parcel of my recovery for years and years, but I've got other things that I do. I go to a men's group regularly, and I go to the Church of the Pacific with my surfing practice regularly, and I seem to get those vitamins and nutrients I need that way as well.
Beautiful, beautiful. And how do you maintain your spiritual condition, that conscious contact with a higher power on a daily basis?
Well, I have a meditation practice, and that surely helps if I'm spiritually discontent. I know I haven't been being quiet. Surfing is a huge spiritual practice for me. And to tell you the truth, the way that we do, it seems to me, with 21st century brain science and addiction medicine, we know that people in long-term recovery actually rewrite the architecture of their brain. They rewrite the way the brain works. And so I don't really make too many distinctions about what is spiritual and what isn't. It all seems to be kind of a spiritual experience to me, and I'm completely grateful for that. Do you know the Course in Miracles, or A Course in Miracles?
Yes.
And you're familiar with the idea that there are no special relationships. Everything in creation and in the universe is sacred.
I've heard of the book. I have not read the book, but I can concur with that whole philosophy. I also believe in the ideology that we are all one, and we are all connected to a source or a higher power. So I do have that same belief system.
Yeah, I love that. And it's so fun. It's like a bouquet of flowers, all inimitably beautiful, but all looking a little bit different around the same idea.
I guess my ideology and, the way I've kind of seen organized religion, I don't follow any sort of organized religion or have a practice as such. But to me, because there's so many cultures, there's so many countries, there's so much diversity that, with all these different religions, we're all really praying to the same God. It's just through different glasses or through different perspectives. I mean, that's just basically my belief system.
I'm right with you. I align seamlessly with those words. And I also have come to understand that atheism, or any expression of sort of deep understanding or deep ontology or ontological process, has parity with all others. In other words, an atheist doesn't really subscribe to organized religion, but most I've met are very thoughtful and look at nature as something really extraordinary, or however they do look at it. So it's all good. It's all God as far as I'm concerned.
Awesome. I agree. And Herbie, so tell me, how much clean time do you have, and when is your anniversary date?
May 2nd, and so 22 years this last, just a couple of weeks ago, I guess, right? Or a month ago.
Yeah, well, we're just exactly a month ago today, May 2nd, is you celebrated 22 years. That is a huge milestone. I just celebrated 13 years on the 26th, so May seemed to have a lot of anniversaries. I thought that was interesting. I interviewed quite a few people this year that had a May anniversary. Not quite sure what the significance is behind that, but The way it worked out.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. When we do share our stories, and I'm sure you've got a story why that time is significant for you. I certainly do. And it's different for everybody. But I love the idea that April, May, springtime, lots happened April and May in my life with respect to some history that I was running from. And so I think it's very important, these birthdays, that we anchor in perpetuity, right?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I hadn't thought about that, but there is that beginning. Spring is, an environment for growth, for new beginnings. Maybe that's it. It never even crossed my mind, but I can dig it. I can roll with it.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Rebirthing, right?
Yep. So, Herbie, tell us how old you were the first time you drank or used drugs, and more importantly, how did they make you feel?
I remember vividly the first time. I was 13-ish, and the boys were on their way to what was called the Hoover Hang Out, and it was a dance in junior high school. And one of the guys got a hold of his dad's whiskey, and we were at a place called the Rose Garden in San Jose, California, and I can still reenact it going down, and I said, I like this, and I think I'm going to do this some more. And then I just sort of lost all of my inhibitions. I was able to dance for the first time in my life, and it was really great.
Yep, that sounds very oddly familiar. All right. Okay, so listen, it's time for me to turn the show over to you. It's time for you to share your story, the battle against drugs and alcohol, the wreckage it caused in your life, when you hit rock bottom, and finally your journey up until recovery today. So Herbie, take it away.
Well, I was the youngest of four. My father, a double board certified physician in psychiatry and internal medicine, and he was also doubly addicted to alcohol and other drugs, prescription drugs. He died of addiction when I was 9 years old.
Wow.
By suicide. And it was a huge blow to the family. In those years, this was 1963, in those years, people didn't speak of addiction in the ways that they do now, and especially when a physician I don't even use the terms drug addict and alcoholic anymore because I think they're pejorative and subjugating, but to think of oneself, a physician particularly, using his own drugs as a drug addict was taboo. So we didn't know what was going on, other than the fact that Dad's no longer around, and we all coped in the ways that we did. My track was to get kind of fuzzy around it, get kind of vague around it until, 12 and 13 came along when it was cool to experiment with alcohol, and I was off and running. As you know, 20% of us are susceptible from a genetic predisposition to addiction. I certainly was there. Another marker is using drugs or alcohol and other drugs early on, and 13 is early on. It's common for a lot of us, as you know. And I used alcohol like the rest of the culture every chance I got. On the weekends, I was the guy that could use more of it. I could drive while using it. I was the last one at the party and wanted to stay longer when everybody else was ready to go home. And it was apparent to me when I was about 18. I remember going to my mother's closet after being hungover as an 18-year-old young man. And, 18-year-olds don't get hungover very often because but I was in bad shape, and I just guzzled some gin she had in the closet just to feel well. And I knew then and there that something was very, very wrong.
Yeah.
But it was my best kept secret. And took the practice into college, was introduced to stimulants like cocaine and other drugs, and was off and running. Got married, somehow was able to mask it and, just be one of the guys. And then it became very problematic. I'd stay out all night. My former wife was then really having a hard time with what I thought was just okay behavior to come home and relax.
You got married in college?
I got married shortly after college. I'm 62 years old, so I'm having a little difficulty putting the years back together. But I got married when I was 24, so that was when I entered chiropractic school, when I was becoming a chiropractor in 1978. And continued the behavior and rewarding myself like I was taught in the culture to do. And, the behavior just got more and more bizarre. And I had all kinds of rationale for it when, I was repressing very strong emotions. When I was 16, I found out that my grandfather, my namesake, committed suicide. So the two men for whom I was named commit suicide. It was kept a family secret. And I don't bring that up as a shock jock approach, but that kind of thing can be harbored in a young man's psyche, and without processing that stuff and refathering oneself, it can really lead to some of this behavior. So
certainly,
long story short, I'm 32 years old. I have a night out in the town, never did come home. And then my family suggested that I get some help. I didn't know what to do. I called Alcoholics Anonymous, attended my first Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. It was a clean and sober meeting. And I remember standing up in the back of the room, sleep deprived and still under the influence, and with Vietnam veterans and a smoke-filled room, and introduced myself and said I had no idea what was going on with me or what was wrong, but something was very wrong. And then and there I decided I would not drink or use drugs anymore, but I certainly wasn't going to hang out with those freaks.
I know the feeling.
So I did the white knuckle thing for about 3 years, and then in the fourth year surrendered to being very seriously addicted to alcohol and opiates, using prescription opiates, and
so
submitted.
You also went down that road.
I did. And just, opiates was another, oh my God, this is fantastic, because I could behave and be in the culture without really being detected. I was a pretty good chemist.
Right. Real quick, we're talking, 30 years ago?
That was 1986 was my first AA meeting, yes. In fact, 30 years ago, almost to the day.
Now, the opiates back then, what are we talking about as far as prescription opiates?
Just the same stuff, Vicodin and Percocet, and OxyContin hadn't come along, a stronger version, but it's, an opiate's an opiate, and couldn't get my hands on enough of it. So I surrendered again with this healthy voice in the back of my mind, and knowing that I was following my father's path, and entered into a residential program in St. Helena, California, hospital where they've had a time-honored recovery program. And I only needed 2 weeks out of 30 because I am particularly bright and hip, slick, and cool. So I left the program early, and then 9 months later relapsed. And I screwed around for another 4 years.
Wow.
In May 2, 1994, finally surrendered through a number of different circumstances, and have been grateful and healthy ever since.
Wow, man. Now, I saw the video that you sent me. It's been a while since I actually saw it, but there was actual parts in there. Of course, there's the beginning parts where we talk about your father and your grandfather. But since then, for example, once you got sober, I think there was some tragedy as far as your kids are concerned, right?
Yes. One of my sons got very sick with addiction in the year 2007-ish, and, nearly died of the Heath Ledger kind of cocktail. Do you remember that story?
I remember that Heath Ledger overdosed. Was it on heroin?
Well, his cocktail was opiates and benzodiazepines,
benzos. Mm-hmm.
And that kind of thing. So my son entered the process at that time, and in the interim, more suicides in my family because of addiction and compulsive disorder. So, it was just addiction has burned rubber through my family. When my son got sick, I said, I am really going to immerse myself in the study of addiction medicine and devote the rest of my life to it, and have done so ever since in different capacities. But that's why I'm so passionate about hanging out with people who are interested in getting and staying well, and addiction is a wonderful path for that.
Absolutely. So take us through that journey, 22 years of recovery, and you are a recovery coach. You also have a podcast So take us through that journey, getting clean and sober, and then getting involved in becoming a wellness coach and the podcast.
Well, I just love the AA community in the formative years in early recovery. And, well, don't we all think of every day as early recovery, I hope, but in the formative years and being able to connect with like minds and noticing that more of me was coming online, that my brain was working better, that I was feeling better. And then the other pieces came along. I realized that I wasn't eating well, that I was eating, a lot of inflammatory food. So I felt kind of crappy most of the time. And then I got that piece. And the exercise piece has always been with me. The surfing piece has always been with me. But I went through lots and lots of other kinds of exploration. Men's groups have always been very important in my recovery, and psychotherapy from one-on-one to that kind of exploration of what's going on with my mind. How can I really take responsibility for my life and understand, how to be more compassionate with myself and empathetic with myself and others. So lots and lots of exploration that way. And it just delivered me to this place where, I sort of found out what I wanted to be when I grew up by helping in the recovery community in a way that I never knew that I would, going out and giving lectures at, local recovery centers and participating as a recovery and wellness coach. And it just, I can't tell you how nice it is to do something that is congruent with who I am instead of working at something that I really don't care about.
Absolutely. And in 2000, looks like here, because I'm right now on your podcast, Sober Conversations. And what inspired you to launch the podcast?
Well, I love conversation and I love critical thought, and I love to be in that place where there's a little bit of an edge. It reminds me of an AA room where just, we sort of learned. Have you ever been in AA experience? And is that one of the things that you do? Oh, do you go to?
I came in through NA. More recently, I participate mostly in AA.
So tell me if you've had this experience where you're in, a place that you've been and you can anticipate who's going to speak next.
Yes.
And it's sort of like a Quaker meeting where, the spirit moves all of us. So I love that place where ideas are exchanged, where there's a little bit of an edge to it and people aren't holding back. I'll never forget being at one of my favorite Stanford AA meetings, and a lot of Stanford professors and students would be there. And one of the English professors would use the word fuck in just the right way and often, So that sort of thing where these erudite sort of individuals just cut loose. And I thought, well, it'd be fun to have a conversation like that and invite interesting people like you do. Oh, present company excluded. I mean, me excluded, not you. But I just think it's bitching when we say, let's talk, and then see what the numinous intelligence in the universe wants to come through us, right?
That's exactly what happens. And so that's what inspired you to launch the podcast. And what was it? Because we're going 2 years now since you launched your last episode. What was it that forced you to derail the project?
Well, I had an opportunity to get back into clinical practice, to use my skills, an integrated approach to a chronic health problem. And this is my real passion, to use my chiropractic skill and experience along with recovery principles in addiction medicine. And so that was a hiatus to go and apply that. It just lasted 16 months. And so now I am rebooting the podcast and getting back into that end of it. But I just think that, along with the language and the verbal skills that we can have in the recovery community, the mind-body, using neurobiological approaches, using techniques to upregulate the entire mind-body spirit is just fascinating to me. That we have the technology. We know that we can affect our genetic blueprint by the things that we do with and to our bodies. And so chiropractic is one of those arts and sciences that does that in a very non-invasive way. So that was my hiatus to see if that could help recovering people as well.
So what is it right now currently that is your primary focus? Is it, your practice right now? Or is there something else that's got you a new project that maybe you're passionate about or getting started with?
Well, it's all of those things, but the big idea is to develop a replacement for IOP,
Okay.
which, for those that don't know, is intensive outpatient program that includes lifetime aftercare. So these centers are more visible, certainly out of the closet, where people go for intensive care and follow-up care like any chronic illness would have. Unfortunately, addiction does not have that. You know, diabetics have that, heart patients have that. We don't. And so I'm working hard and fast at that with a team of people trying to bring this to fruition. There are a lot of addiction treatment approaches, but the aftercare piece is still sort of a mystery. Won't you agree?
Yes. And I don't think we can do enough to delve into that realm. I think there's so many possibilities to be able to help people. The 12-step philosophy has helped so many, but there is, at least in the communities that I'm part of, there is for some a resistance to it, whether it's because it seems to be a bit outdated or just for whatever reason doesn't resonate with them. I think that the need for a very accessible, very affordable aftercare, once you get sober, getting sober is the easy part as far as I'm concerned. Staying sober is the tough part, especially when we deal with so much trauma in our lives growing up. You know, that's my feeling on it.
Well, I agree with you. You know, there are the 5 risk factors, the precursors to what's going on with us, and that is childhood trauma, genetic predisposition, you know, when we first started drinking, what our social environment looked like growing up, and then any psychological or psychiatric overlay like ADHD or bipolar situation. So we do have to address those 5 things, but we have to continue taking pristine care of ourselves, the way that we move or exercise, the way that we think, the way that we feel, and, you know, sleeping habits. And so I like to call those things go-brainers. And you got the guy sitting in the back of the traditional AA recovery room, and, you know, he's saying, look, just don't drink and go to meetings, as he has just sat down after the break having a glazed donut and a cigarette and clawing the leather off of the chair because of his repressed emotion. You know, he's going to die of metabolic syndrome, but he hasn't had a drink. So I just think it's preposterous that we trade diseases that way instead of getting and staying well, as you said. Easier said than done, but we have the technology, and that just gets me stoked even talking about it, as you can see.
No, I agree 100%. And on the topic of food and health, that's something that's been more recent for me. And, you know, with 13 years, I just recently really started to take a look at my diet and, you know, what is actually inside the food, if we want to call it food, that I've been consuming over the last 45 years of my life. You know, not really taking a lot of consideration to not knowing what a GMO is, not knowing how animal agriculture affects us as an organism and the planet, how dairy affects me or inflammation and all this stuff. And it wasn't until recently when I started doing the podcast and I started interviewing people that were marathon runners that had become vegan, that had, you know, changed so much of their body chemistry by changing what they were actually ingesting. So I love delving into that topic, which is probably more of where you're at. I don't know if you qualify your eating habits in any particular way. Are you vegan or paleo, or is there something that, you know, you would call your particular eating style?
Yeah, I think that I am a hybrid paleo approach. But again, I think that it is the experiment of one. I have tried veganism and vegetarianism, and it didn't work for me particularly, but I know Rich Roll. Is it Rich Roll?
Yep, it is Rich Roll.
I mean, a fantastic guy, and he's a monster vegan, right?
Yeah, it's a ultra marathon runner, vegan. Yeah.
And, you know, I am a podcast slut, so I listen to, you know, the wellness community all day long. Mark Sisson, I interviewed Mark Sisson, and I just love it because everybody's open-minded. They say, yeah, that's what works for me, and here's how I know, and how do I look, how do I feel, how am I functioning, and not it's got to be this fundamentalist way. So An anti-inflammatory approach makes sense to me. Eating whole, nutrient-dense foods, whether you consume animal protein or not, is, a big subject, but you got to find out for yourself. And there's tons and tons of evidence-based science out there that supports all of this now, and it's all good news.
Yeah, it is all good news, which, we didn't really touch too much. One of the things that I really wanted to touch on is when I saw the video and the email that you sent me says, the multiple suicides in my family inspired my lifelong quest for meaning and purpose. And then you quoted Eckhart Tolle. Death is not the opposite of life. Life has no opposite. So can you expand a little bit about these moments in your life? Because there's a few moments where suicide, took a big toll in your life and in your family's life, and what you did to get through those tough moments.
Yeah, I think I strategized and I coped early on with the things that are offered us as young people, sadly. The initiation rites we have as adolescents and young men and women are virtually none. So that's how I coped. And then when I realized it was literally killing me, I just think it's a freaking miracle, the way that most of us do, that I was in front of the right guy at the right time or gal, and they led me to this process or that. But I was just guided to the other side. And I think that a suicide is really a mysterious thing for families and for the culture. It is the ultimate taboo to take one's life from even a religious standpoint these days. And it's a mystery. What does it mean when somebody just ceases to exist by their own hand? So I have been on this search for meaning all of my life, putting it together. What does it mean to be alive? And then to hang on to that, sometimes by the skin of my teeth. I actually wrote a little book about it called Quantum Sense, the New Common Sense, going, in a big way of comprehending my existence. But it was very, very confusing for me for many, many years, that particularly the men in my life, I really had no foundation of what it was like to be a man or a father, for that matter, when my sons were younger. And I'm proud of my fatherdom, but it was very confusing. And not to be able to share that with anybody who hadn't been through suicide, was painful as well.
Did it ever cross your mind? Were there ever moments in your life where you contemplated or you felt you could understand where possibly they were coming from and why they did it?
Absolutely. I have so many wonderful trance-like experiences, either in a sensory deprivation tank or a Native American sweat lodge or holotropic breathing. I, became interested in using plant medicine at one point. I don't think it's a good plant for me, but things like ayahuasca and those kinds of journeys to really deeply empathize with my dad, my grandfather, my aunt, my uncles who had this experience. And I think that's what it is, to be able to see, another person, that deep empathy, to be able to frame another person's perspective in some way that you identify with it. My story I equated to the Wizard of Oz. My father shot himself right in the heart. He was a physician, so he knew right where to put the bullet. My grandfather shot himself right in the brain. And so when I turned 40 years old, Carl Jung says that most men die when they're 40 but aren't buried till they're 90. And so it happens a lot that men and women have that sort of halfway point epiphany. And so I realized that my father was saying to me, who shot himself in the heart, instead of me being victimized by it, he was saying, son, live by your heart, open your heart. And it became very profound for me. And my grandfather was saying, son, develop your intellect, use your brain. And so they became these paradoxical gifts to be able to see those men that way and have them be in my life and a gift and not a curse.
Well, your father was an addict as well. Was that the cause of or the reason behind the suicide for your father?
Well, we don't know because, there's no real way. There was no note left that, by the way, I'm an addict and I'm out of here.
Oh, so neither one of them left a note?
No.
Wow.
But I think that, addiction is a chronic, recurrent, potentially fatal disease process, and people die, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, holed up in a room, or they die by falling asleep and driving off a bridge, or die of metabolic syndrome because they're taking such crappy care of themselves. But addiction has many, many, manifestations when people do die. So certainly he did die of addiction. My father was not well when he died, and had he been, he would have had a better chance for his brain to start working better and making better decisions. That was his decision, but it wasn't the greatest decision for his family.
I'm curious, because I've talked to a few people who have done the journey of ayahuasca, and they describe it as, I guess, dying to a certain degree and then being reborn, and it's painful. Was that your experience?
I haven't had an ayahuasca experience. I said I became interested in it.
Okay,
and then
sorry.
I thought, I love Aubrey Marcus and his work, and I love Fadiman and the work that they're doing, because there's a resurgence of it. Dr. Dan Engel, Dr. Martin Polanco, all of those guys are really, really doing responsible work around helping people with addiction with plant medicines. And I just think it's fascinating stuff to have an ontological shift that way and to open up more awareness in your being. And these plant medicines can certainly do that. They've been around for 4.5 billion years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those odd curiosities that I have. It's not something that I plan on ever doing, but whenever it comes up, it's always kind of one of those, I wonder, right? But anytime someone describes it, it sounds like this horrific journey, like 10 times worse than mushrooms ever was.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I went down and visited a clinic in Mexico because Ibogaine, are you familiar with the root Ibogaine and its use in heroin addiction recovery?
I've heard of it, but now I'm not familiar with it. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, it is one of these plant medicines that are used, and I went down to a clinic and I was just so impressed. Actually, I was there with a special forces gentleman and a orthopedic surgeon, and they were both associated with the Navy hospital in San Diego. And they were there because, as you know, there are 22 military suicides every single day in the armed forces. So people are reaching out and saying, what else is there that we can do about this? But Ibogaine is a very, very profound experience from what I've learned. And it is, as you described, entering into the dark night of the soul and then coming out on the other side and saying, oh, I'm ready to embrace my shadow. I'm ready to move forward. And it's miraculous work.
And you're 62, right?
I am.
And you regularly surf?
I do.
For how many years now?
I want to say something like the summer of 69. My dad threw me in the ocean when I was 2, so body surfing counts. I've been surfing all my life. I just absolutely dig it. I can't think of anything more fun. It's just unbelievable. You lose sense of self. You lose sense of gravity. It's just such a trip.
Yeah, I have never talked to, living in Costa Rica, you would think that I would have picked that up. I have not. I have surfed a few times, and I have friends of mine that are avid surfers, and that's just, they live for it. And that's what I find is that when you click, when it connects, when you connect with the practice of the ritual of surfing, that it is one of those experiences that once you're out there, it's like meditating. You know, you are one with the planet, you're one with the wave, and it's the most liberating experience. That's what they say.
Well, the other thing, and I think we can find it in any practice of mastery like that, but the other thing, is that it's wild. You know, we don't have too many opportunities to scream at the top of our lungs and just go for it, you know, especially as it becomes more and more crowded. I don't know if you've been to the Bay Area recently, but it's pretty crazy, man. It's just busy, but you can't just stop on the freeway, get out of your car and scream at the top of your lungs. Well, I guess you can, but and we are wild men and women, aren't we? It's nice to express that wild animal, you know, aspect of ourselves. And so surfing offers that for me too.
Oh man, I love it. So as we narrow down, or as we start to close up on the interview, I just want to ask you some questions about your early recovery for the newcomers that are listening. So are you ready?
I am.
All right. So number one, when you first got introduced to recovery, what was keeping you from getting clean or staying clean?
When I was first introduced, I think it was just not sticking with structure. I was terminally unique. I didn't have the brain map. The way that the brain works, there's an expression that says that the neurons that fire together wire together. So I wasn't disciplined enough to stick with it one day at a time because I didn't have the payoff yet. And that's what mastery takes. I like to think of addiction recovery as a practice of mastery. So, time in, time out, time in, time out. And then time in, I would have regimens like going to 3 AA meetings a day when I could around my work. And I would, have a sponsor and do the steps and really take a look. And so discipline really, really worked for me in early recovery. And I think that that's what the 12-step process can do for one. It's not the only process, but there's none better. Won't you agree?
Yes, I do. And it's a good point that you bring up as far as that instant gratification. That we're so used to that. In early recovery, there is no instant gratification. There's work involved, and there's struggle, and there's pain, and there's fear. And, you want to mask that. And so I can relate to that. I don't think I put it in words when I was in early recovery or maybe even seen it that way. But it does make sense that for people that are new in recovery, they're so used to getting that quick fix. And like you were talking about, the guy shoving a donut in his mouth and having a cigarette. And it's just about that, what can I do to immediately change my state?
Right.
Which makes it difficult to stay clean.
You bet. And I didn't know there was a payoff. I thought that it was kind of a deprivation program where I would just have to learn to live without my favorite things. And as it turned out, my favorite things now are far, far better than any of that stuff. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. But it took a while for that to come on board and to hang out with people who had done it. And repetition is the mother of all invention.
Yes. And it does get easier once the payoffs start to come, which is going to be the next question I'm going to ask you, as a matter of fact. So let's talk about those. At what point did you have your first spiritual awakening, that aha moment in recovery when you accepted that you were powerless over drugs and alcohol, but for the first time developed the hope that you could recover?
Well, I think I was sitting in front of a psychotherapeutic type and, going in with my 3-piece suit on, and here's we wore them as, the doctor of chiropractic, thinking I was, sort of above it all. And the psychotherapy guy sat down with me and looked me in the eye and said, Herbie, you were just so full of shit. And it was the most beautiful thing that I get tears in my eyes now, because he meant it compassionately. He meant it to say, son, you've really got to get this. I really care about you. Not you're an asshole. Well, that too, but and it was just this rude awakening that somebody sees me. Somebody really sees me. And I can depend upon something like that. And maybe that's not what you were looking for, but that led to more and more opening and just, the verve and joy of life, and really seeing, my entire life as a spiritual experience. Just happened to be in this skin tube called Herbie.
That's exactly what I was looking for. It's all personal. It's all individualized. That's why I asked the question, because it comes in so many different forms. And it's just about that moment where you realize that there's something happening. Sometimes it's this fleeting thought, this fleeting moment, this fleeting feeling, but it's different. It's different than something you've ever felt before, and you connect with it, and you connected with this person, and it was the beginning, right?
Yeah, right. And then I ambled off to, the more intense treatment program, and that was it. Or, as of today, that was the last formal treatment that I've had, but I see him as an absolute angel in my life.
And we all have those angels in our lives that come in and they rattle our tree, man. It kicks in, and you're like, oh my God, I get it. And it's a wonderful feeling. It's a wonderful feeling to, for the first time, develop that hope, because that's what it is. You're connecting with hope and faith for the first time. And that's what really propels us. It's what propelled me, on top of, my daughter was born when I got sober. She's 13 and I'm 13. So she was the most important catalyst to me really diving into recovery. But soon thereafter, I realized that she wasn't going to be able to keep me clean. I had to find, my own why as to why I was doing it above and beyond her. But it's been a beautiful journey, A, to do it with her, and B, that she never has to see the man that I used to be, which is pretty awesome.
Beautifully said. She's fantastic, I'll bet.
She is, man.
What's her name?
What's that?
What's her name?
Her name is Marissa.
Marissa, and so you all speak fluent Spanish as well as English?
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, she speaks actually much better Spanish than I do, since I spent so much time in the States. But she dominates the English and Spanish language, and she's a good student. And she, knock on wood, she's 13 and she hasn't touched any drugs or alcohol, and she's just a good kid, and I hope it skips over. It's her journey, not mine, but so far so good. She's watched her mother and I are divorced, but her family is not, there's no alcoholism in her family. All the alcoholism comes from my side, and my side of the family is still in the States. So she's surrounded by her Costa Rica family, and it's a very, very tight-knit, very whole family. So there's so many God shots. There's so many things where I look and I go, wow, I have so much to be grateful for. And I'm so grateful that I didn't go back to the States when I got sober, because, that was one of the things too. I was so rattled when I got sober that crossed my mind, but I said, I'm not going to leave her. I can't leave her. And it's the best decision I ever made.
Well, she's lucky to have you, man. And I think that's just so exactly right, that gratitude thing. If I don't have a practice, I've got a little thing that I do, the 5-minute journal, maybe you've heard of it, that I just sit down in the morning and at night, and I jot things down categorically. And if I don't have a practice, I tend to move away from that. I think that is the mindset, of a person with addiction. We kind of migrate back to the old mindset. And so it's just nice to have those practices, and having a daughter to remind you of that is beautiful. It
is. I don't know if I used to do that more religiously, which is the morning miracle, Hal Elrod. You do these 6 different things in the morning, even if it just takes a minute, but part of it is journaling and reading and meditating and doing a little bit of exercise, where you just kind of like kickstart your day with, very positive intentions, and similar to what you do, which is you sit down and you journal. And most of the time when you do, it's going to be positive, right? When you put pen to paper, typically you'll connect with what you're grateful for. So for newcomers, yeah, I would say that is definitely, if you can connect with the idea of getting up and doing some sort of journaling, it's going to speak volumes for your program, and even for your happiness throughout the day, right?
I agree. And then my experience is that the practices become synergistic. In other words, the sum total is greater than their parts. And go through, you're at the end of the day, and you just say, man, there's just a buzz going on that I never knew existed.
Oh, at the kind of like an inventory.
Or just this idea that I do these things that highlight my day, and life is what happens when you're busy doing other things. But these practices for wellness, are what my life is about. And it's a great way to be.
Right. No, I got you. Beautiful. So let me ask you this, Herbie. Do you have any books or favorite books you could recommend to our newcomers?
Oh, my Lord.
Too many, huh?
Yeah. I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I think that I'm thinking of, it's left my consciousness, Stephen Levine's work, but this is The Imperfection of Spirituality, or anything that you're attracted to, I think is the way to go. But whether it's reading books, or I love to listen to books these days. Do you ever do that, O?
That's all I do. I can't read for whatever reason. I'm not a reader, but I got a lot of audiobooks.
Yeah, I think that, there's so many authors and so many ways to go about it. So audible.com is fantastic. Motivational stuff up the yin yang, but the early recovery literature is fantastic. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, reading the stories, is a wonderful way to see that there are other people who have had your experience, but just follow your heart on that. And I think reading is a beautiful thing to do for the intellect too.
Absolutely. And what is the best suggestion you have ever received?
The best suggestion I have ever received, I think, was from my dad, and that was, live true to your heart, son. Live by your heart and true to your heart. To thine own heart be true, right?
Yes. So if you could give our listeners only one suggestion, what would that be?
Well, I love the expression. I read somewhere recently that we don't get real until our hair is mostly loved off and our eyes are sinking into our head. We don't get real, but every opportunity you have, just celebrate just exactly who you are, because that's exactly why you were born, and then more will be revealed. So, more along this line of being true to your heart, but it's just so powerful. And then all kinds of information will come to you if you're not pretending you're somebody else.
Herbie, that's beautiful, man. That's absolutely beautiful. I think that God, his purpose for us is not only to be happy, because I think that's his number one purpose for us is to be happy, but also to find and develop the best version of ourselves. We're all different. We all have different skills and talents and drives and passions. And I truly believe that we're here to find out what that is and then just be the best at it.
So agree. And, the greatest challenge and hardest work. But that's it. I love to ask young people at a retail place, hey, what is it that you're going to do when you get to be my age? And, sometimes people will say, I was just thinking about that. And it's a nice conversation to be in. I also like to ask older people, for instance, my 92-year-old father-in-law, hey, what do you know 30 years, what do you know what it was like to be 62 in retrospect? And, it's just fascinating what human beings know. We're just a wealth of wisdom.
I agree. So, Herbie, before we close up, tell us the best way that we can reach you, your websites, your social media, and the best way for us to find you.
You can find me at recoveryhealthcare.me, and that's all one word, recoveryhealthcare.me. You can find me, my Twitter handle is Herby Bell, HerbyBell. I spell Herbie with a Y because I've got lots of Ys. Y4, Herby Bell at Twitter, or you can call me, 650-474-9411. And I love the expression that all new beginnings start with a great conversation.
Man, I love it. This has been a great conversation, Herbie.
Well, you made it so, man. You're very, very easy to be with, and thank you for your kindness and all of this fantastic work you're doing in the world.
Same to you, brother. Same to you. I appreciate you.
Right back at you.
All right, folks, we have now reached the end of the show. Thanks for joining us. And as we say here in Costa Rica, pura vida.
Pura vida?
Thank you for joining us on the Share Recovery Podcast. To check out the show notes page on this interview or to thank our guests for sharing their story, go to www.thesharepodcast.com. While you're on the website, don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter to stay up to date on the latest news, podcasts, and interviews. Want to be one of our guests and share your story? Then go to our website and click on the Share Your Story button. We share our inspiring recovery stories every Tuesday, so subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher Radio to get your free weekly download. We'll see you then. The opinions shared on this show reflect those of the individual speaker and not of any 12-Step Fellowship as a whole. And though we discuss 12-Step recovery and the impact it